Hello, classmates. Welcome to International Trade class. This lecture, we will learn how to measure costs and the benefits of a tariff. A tariff raises the price of a good in the importing country, so consumers lose in the importing country, but the producers gain in the importing country. In addition, the government imposing the tariff gains revenue. To compare these costs and benefits, it's necessary to quantify them. The method for measuring costs and benefits of a tariff depends on two concepts common to much microeconomic analysis: consumer and producer surplus. Consumer surplus measures the amount a consumer gains from a purchase. It refers to the difference between the amount that buyers would be willing and able to pay for a good and the actual amount they do pay. For example, if a consumer would have been willing to pay $8 for a bush wheat, but the price is only $3, the consumer surplus gained by the purchase is $5. Consumer surplus is represented by the area under the demand curve and above the price. The size of the consumer surplus is also affected by the market price. A decrease in the market price will lead to an increase in the quantity purchased and a large consumer surplus. Conversely, a higher market price will reduce the amount purchased and shrink the consumer surplus. In Figure 1, we can see if the price is P1, the quantity demanded is D1, and the consumer surplus is measured by the areas labeled A plus B. If the price rises to P2 and the quantity demanded falls to D2, and the consumer surplus falls by B to equal just A. Producer surplus is the revenue producers receive over and above the minimum amount required to induce them to supply a good. For instance, a producer willing to sell a good for $2 but receiving a price of $5 gains a producer surplus of $3. The producer surplus is represented by the area above the supply curve and below the price. The size of the producer surplus is also affected by the market price. A decrease in the market price will lead to a decrease in the quantity supplied and a small producer surplus. Conversely, a higher market price will enlarge the amount purchased and the producer surplus. In Figure 2, if the price is P1, the quantity supplied will be S1, and the producer surplus is measured by the area C. If the price rises to P2, the quantity supplied rises to S2, and the producer surplus rises to area C plus area D. Now, we can use the concepts of consumer surplus and producer surplus to analyze the costs and the benefits of a tariff for the importing country. Because tariffs have different effects on a large country and a small country, we need to consider two cases. First, we assume the importing country is a small country. This small nation would be a price taker, which can't affect world prices. Figure 3 illustrates the cost and the benefits of a tariff for the small nation. The tariff raises the domestic price from PW to PW plus T. The imposing nation's consumers burden all the tariff. Domestic consumers now face a higher price, which makes them worse off. As we can see in the figure 3, the price consumers face rises from PW to PW plus T. The consumer surplus falls by the area indicated by A plus B plus C plus D. So consumers are hurt by the tariff. For the domestic producers, they receive a higher price and therefore have higher producer surplus. In figure 3, before the tariff, producer surplus was equal to the area below PW, but above the supply curve, with the price rising to PW plus T. This surplus rises by the area labeled A. That means producers gain from the tariff. There is a third player here as well, the government. The government gains by collecting tariff revenue. This is equal to the tariff rate T times the volume of imports, QT, equal D2 minus S2. So the government's revenue is equal to the sum of the areas C, which we call revenue effect. So let's look at the net effect of a tariff on importing countries' welfare. The net cost of a tariff is consumer loss minus producer gain minus government revenue. Replacing these concepts by the areas in figure 3, we can get the net cost of a tariff is B plus D, which is constituted by two triangles in the figure 4. The triangles represent the efficiency loss or deadweight loss that arises because a tariff distorts incentives to consumer and produce. Triangle B is the production distortion loss resulting from the fact that the tariff risks domestic producers to produce too much of this good. The domestic producers are less efficient compared with foreign producers, so the resources are wasted. Triangle D is the domestic consumption distortion loss resulting from the fact a tariff risks consumers to consume too little of the good. In a word, leaving an import tariff reduces a small nation's welfare. Second, we assume the importing country is a large country. Because it's a large country, although the tariff raises the domestic price from PW to PT in figure 5, it lowers the foreign export price from PW to PT star at the same time, which is different from a small nation in which the tariff's burden falls entirely on domestic consumers. Domestic production also rises from S1 to S2, while domestic consumption falls from D1 to D2. So domestic consumer surplus falls by an amount equal to areas A plus B plus C plus D. Domestic producers' surplus increases by area A. In fact, area A represents the redistributive effect, which is the transfer of the consumer surplus to the domestic producers of the importing competing product. As in the small nation example, government revenue equals the import tariff multiplied by the quantity of imported. This effect yields areas C plus E. Notice that the tariff revenue accruing to the government now comes from foreign producers as well as domestic consumers. Thus, the revenue effect of an import tariff in the large nation includes two components. The first is the amount of tariff revenues shifted from domestic consumers to the tariff-raving government. LLC deprecates the domestic revenue effect. The second element is the tariff revenue extracted from foreign producers in the form of a lower supply price, which is deprecated by LLE. We also call it the terms of trade gain that arise because a tariff lowers foreign export prices. So the net cost of a tariff in a large country is consumer loss minus producer gain minus government revenue equal B plus D minus E, summarized in Figure 6. Just like a small nation, the two triangles represent the efficiency loss, but the rectangle E represents the terms of trade gain. The conclusions regarding the welfare effect of a tariff for a big country area are as follows. 1. If E is greater than B plus D, national welfare is increased. 2. If E equals B plus D, national welfare remains constant. 3. If E is less than B plus D, national welfare is diminished. A nation that is a major importer of a product may be in a favorable trade situation. It can use its tariff policy to improve the terms at which it trades and therefore its national welfare. However, it may result in retaliation